Think about the last funeral you attended. There was a casket, a service, maybe flowers, maybe music. Someone said words. People cried. And then a body was placed in the ground, carefully, deliberately, with intention. You didn't think twice about it because that's just what humans do. But for most of our species' existence, that wasn't what humans did at all. For hundreds of thousands of years, when someone died, the body was simply left where it fell. Scavengers handled the rest. So why did that change? Why did one specific group of humans, at one specific moment in time, look at a corpse and decide it needed to be placed in the earth with care? The answer isn't what most people think. It isn't religion, it isn't fear of ghosts, and it isn't even grief. At least not the way you understand grief. The real reason is stranger, older, and more revealing than any explanation ever taught in a classroom. Let's start with what archaeologists actually find when they dig. In 2013, deep inside the Rising Star cave system in South Africa, researchers reached a chamber so narrow that only the smallest excavators could squeeze through. What they pulled out stopped the field of paleoanthropology cold. Bones, hundreds of them, from at least 15 individuals of a species called Homo naledi, a small-brained hominin with a skull roughly one-third the size of yours. The bones were dated to around 250,000 years ago, far older than anyone expected, and they were placed there deliberately. There was no other way for those bodies to reach that chamber. No flood could carry them, no predator could drag them. Someone, or many someones, had carried the dead through pitch darkness, through passages so tight they had to crawl, and laid them in a place specifically chosen for one purpose: hiding them. That single discovery rewrote everything. Because before Rising Star, the earliest evidence of intentional burial was around 100,000 years old, performed by anatomically modern humans and Neanderthals. The assumption was simple. Burial required big brains, complex language, and abstract thought. Homo naledi had none of those things, and yet they buried their dead anyway, which means the impulse to dispose of a body with intention is not a side effect of intelligence. It came first. Now here's where it gets genuinely strange. At the Sima de los Huesos site in northern Spain, archaeologists found something even more disturbing. A 40-foot vertical shaft at the bottom of a deep cave system filled with the bones of at least 28 individuals, all dated to roughly 430,000 years ago. These were Homo heidelbergensis, ancestors of both Neanderthals and modern humans. The bodies hadn't fallen in. The geology proves it. They were dropped, carefully, from above. Alongside the bodies, researchers found a single hand axe made of red quartzite, a stone not local to that site. Someone carried it for miles and threw it down with the dead. That stone tool, nicknamed Excalibur by the team, may be the oldest known grave good in human history. It wasn't useful. It wasn't practical. It was symbolic. And symbolism, real symbolism, isn't supposed to exist yet at that point in evolution. But here's the part most documentaries skip entirely. Why bury at all? The standard answers fall apart under scrutiny. Disease prevention? Possible, but ancient hunter-gatherers didn't have the germ theory of disease, and bodies left in the open didn't typically trigger epidemics in mobile populations. Predator avoidance? Only partly. Some burials are too deep and too elaborate to be explained by simply keeping scavengers away. Grief? Closer, but grief alone doesn't explain why specific tools were included, why bodies were positioned in specific ways, why ochre pigment was sprinkled across them. The deeper answer comes from something neurologists have only recently begun to understand. The human brain processes a dead body in a way that is biologically unique among animals. When most animals encounter a corpse of their own species, the reaction is either curiosity, alarm, or indifference. Elephants linger. Chimpanzees sometimes carry dead infants for days. But humans do something different. We continue to see the person. The face is still recognized. The voice is still expected. The brain refuses, for hours, sometimes weeks, to fully accept that the individual is gone. This neurological glitch, this lag between biological death and cognitive acceptance, may be the actual origin of burial. The body wasn't being hidden because it was dangerous. It was being placed somewhere because the surviving humans couldn't tolerate seeing it slowly cease to be a person. Decomposition was the enemy, not because of smell, not because of disease, but because watching a face you loved transform into something unrecognizable was psychologically unbearable. Burial wasn't about the dead. It was about the living and the brain's inability to let go. Now consider what happened next. Around 100,000 years ago, at a cave called Kafse in modern-day Israel, archaeologists found the burial of a young woman with a child placed at her feet. Both bodies had been carefully positioned. Both had been sprinkled with red ochre, and nearby, deliberately placed, was the antler of a deer. This wasn't just removal of a body, this was composition. Whoever buried this mother and child arranged the scene to mean something. The ochre, the antler, the position of the child at the woman's feet. Every detail communicated information to anyone who would later see it. And here's what's extraordinary. There was no writing. There were no shared religious texts. There wasn't even, as far as we know, a common spoken language across regions. And yet, across thousands of miles and tens of thousands of years, human burials began following recurring patterns. Bodies in fetal position, facing east, sprinkled with red pigment, accompanied by tools or ornaments. The patterns didn't spread through communication. They emerged independently in populations that had no contact with each other, which means burial was tapping into something older than culture, something built into the brain itself. The next layer of the mystery comes from Neanderthals. For decades, Neanderthals were portrayed as the brutish dead end of human evolution. Then, in 1960, at Shanidar Cave in Iraq, researchers found a Neanderthal skeleton known as Shanidar 4, surrounded by concentrations of flower pollen. The initial interpretation was poetic. Neanderthals had laid flowers on their dead. Later analysis challenged this, suggesting the pollen may have been brought in by burrowing animals. But subsequent discoveries at the same site, including Shanidar Z in 2020, confirmed something the original team had been right about. Neanderthals were burying their dead deliberately, in specific positions, in specific places, returning to the same locations across generations to bury more. These were not animals stumbling into ritual by accident. They were thinking about death, planning around it, returning to the dead. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Shanidar Z was buried roughly 75,000 years ago. The body had been placed beneath a large vertical stone marker, the kind of detail that suggests the grave was meant to be found again, remembered, revisited. A headstone, 75,000 years before written language existed. So why did humans start burying their dead? Pull all the evidence together, and a single answer emerges. Burial wasn't invented to honor the dead. It was invented to protect the living from a problem the human brain creates and no other animal has to solve. The problem of continuing to see a person who is no longer there. When you bury a body, you give the brain a single moment of finality. The body goes into the earth. The earth covers it. The image stops updating. The face you loved is preserved in memory exactly as it was, never transformed by what nature does next. Every culture that ever existed eventually arrived at this solution, because every culture is made of brains that share the same flaw. We are the only species that grieves a face. We are the only species that needs the image to stop. And so we dig. Go back to that funeral. The casket, the flowers, the words, the careful placement of the body in the ground. Every element of it traces back to a Homo naledi crawling through a pitch-dark cave 250,000 years ago, carrying someone they loved into a chamber where the image could finally stop. The ritual you witnessed wasn't invented by your culture. It wasn't invented by any religion. It was inherited from the first hominin who looked at a body and realized something the rest of the animal kingdom never has to face. That memory of a person outlasts the person, and the only way to keep the memory intact is to remove the body from view. Funerals aren't about death. They never were. They are the oldest, most universal answer to a uniquely human problem. The problem of a face you cannot stop seeing in a person who is no longer there. And every time you stand at a graveside, you are participating in a ritual older than your species, older than language, older than nearly everything that makes you human. You are doing what the first hominins did when they realized, for the first time in the history of life on Earth, that the dead don't actually leave.